Hello everyone. So in the last video I just stopped at this case where we stated that both in fixed and floating, both cases X was having an advantageous position, and we somewhat thought that there may not be any possible swap benefit over here. And I told you that there is a possibility that uh, you know uh, there may be a swap which can be engineered which will be beneficial for both of them. We can say that requirement of X is a floating rate, requirement of Y is a fixed rate. So in this video let me just show you how we can create a swap over here so that both the parties X and Y are having an advantage for it. Now for that, if I ask you with regards to X is having a more advantage position in fixed as compared to floating. So if I ask what is the advantage, so I'll simply say advantage to X. Advantage to X, over here we say there is an advantage of 4%, and in case of floating the advantage is of 1%. Okay, so since X is having a higher advantage, in fixed rate, X is actually going to take a fixed rate at 10%. So if you just draw up a diagram over here, X and Y, X is going to take a loan at a fixed rate and then later he is going to convert it to floating rate. So X is going to take a loan at 10%, so he's going to pay outside 10%. And obviously if X is taking a fixed rate loan, Y will have to take a floating rate loan where Y is going to pay outside MIBOR plus 1.5%. MIBOR plus 1.5%. So now obviously if they simply exchange their obligation, so you will find that Y is definitely having an advantage, because Y, if he would have taken a fixed rate loan outside, it would have cost him 14%, whereas if they simply exchange their obligation with each other, let's say they just exchange their obligation, so Y pays X 10% and X pays to Y MIBOR plus 1.5%. So in that way you will say, sir, both of them are not having advantage. In fact, Y is only having advantage, and the advantage to Y is actually 4%, because 14% is the fixed rate and 10% is the rate which Y is paying. Moreover, X is also not going to be happy. X will say to Y that why should I enter into this sort of arrangement with you, because anyways the floating rate for me is MIBOR plus 0.5%. Why should I pay you MIBOR plus 1.5%? So at the very first stage, X will say I'm not ready to pay you MIBOR plus 1.5%, because I would have paid MIBOR plus 0.5%. So X will say I'm not going to pay you this much. I'm going to pay you less 1%, for a fact that I would have paid MIBOR plus 0.5%, and with that case I'll be paying you MIBOR plus 0.5 plus 1.5%, but I won't be paying you 1% additional, because the cost for me would have been MIBOR plus 0.5%, so I won't be paying you lesser than this. So that will get translated to it paying MIBOR plus 0.5%. But then Y will be still okay with this, because if you observe the cost for Y over here is like he's paying MIBOR plus 1.5%, he's receiving MIBOR plus 0.5%, and he's paying 10%. So at this stage, cost to Y, you will find that it is MIBOR gets cancelled, he's paying MIBOR, he's receiving MIBOR, that gets cancelled, and additionally 1% he's paying, So basically at this stage, cost to y, you will find it is 11%. So y will be still okay, the entity y will be still okay with this sort of arrangement, because cost for y is turning out to be 11%, which is definitely lower than what it could have bought on its own. But then x will be definitely not so happy. X will be definitely not so happy because for x the cost is MIBOR plus 0.5%. So he's going to say that what is the use of this arrangement when I'm going to pay the same rate which I would have paid. So he would ask why, hey, why, what is the gain for you? So I would say that the gain for me is, cost is currently 11%, fixed rate that I would have got is 14%. So gain for me is 3%. So the gain is 3% over here, and here x is having a gain of nothing. So definitely x will say that do one thing, you give half of your gain to me. You give half of your gain to me, then only it will make some sense. So when you say you give half of gain to me, it means half of 3%, that is 1.5%. 1.5% should be paid back by y to x, then only it will be a fair deal. So if y pays 1.5% back to x, so in short, instead of paying just 10%, if y pays additional 1.5%, so basically I can say this will further get reduced. This will further get reduced by this 1.5%. This will get further reduced, by 1.5%. So after giving this whole effect, you will find that we have x on one side, y on the other side. Y is paying outside MIBOR plus 1.5%. X is paying outside 10%. X will definitely say that you refinance my entire 10%, but I will be paying you, MIBOR plus 1.5% minus 1% minus 1.5%. So essentially what are we really talking of is, X will say I will pay you MIBOR minus 1% as a remittance for you, and you will find that cost for X it is MIBOR minus 1%, and for Y it is like MIBOR is paid out, MIBOR is received, plus 1.5% minus 1%. So essentially that becomes 12.510, and if you take it a net effect, that's going to be 12.5%. If this would have funded by own, then this would have been MIBOR plus 0.5%. This guy would have got it for 14%. So the gain for them is 1.5%. So that's how we observe that a swap is still possible over here with these sort of things. Okay, now do we need to prepare all this working again and again? Definitely you need not look at it. There is a shortcut way to calculate just what should be the cost for x and y. So for that, we simply say difference in fixed rate is 4%, and we say difference in floating rate, which is 1%. So the difference between them is 3%. So the gain possible is 1.5% for x and 1.5% for y. So own cost, if they would have taken up the floating rate or fixed rate on their own, the cost would have been MIBOR plus 0.5%, whereas for the other thing it would have been 14%. So net cost for them, it should be MIBOR plus 0.5% minus 1.5%. So we say MIBOR minus 1%, and this is 12.5%, and that's what we can observe over here, that these are our costs for X and Y. So essentially we will simply say that if we once come to know what is the net cost, we can simply say here we have X, Y. X pays outside 10%, Y pays outside MIBOR plus 1.5%. So X is going to simply receive the 10% that it is financing, and it's going to pay MIBOR minus 1%, and that's exactly what we have obtained earlier. Okay, let's have a look at one more case like this, where we have a swap dealer in between. Suppose we have two parties, M and N. There the fixed rate is suppose 10%, 13%. Floating rate applicable to them is suppose MIBOR and MIBOR plus 1%. Requirement, the requirement is M requires a floating loan, N requires a fixed rate loan, and we say there's a swap dealer who is asking for its margin of, let's say, 0.5% and gain to be shared in equal ratio. So how do we do it? So here we know how do we work out on this. So first we take the difference. We say difference in fixed is of 3%, difference in floating is of 1%. So gain possible is just 2%, but out of that 0.5% is the dealer's margin. 0.5% is the dealer's margin. So we say reduce this by dealer margin. The dealer margin is 0.5%. So essentially that is just 0.5% gain by parties. Now as you have seen, they are to be shared in an equal ratio. So this is going to be shared between M and N in equal ratio. You will say 0.75% and 0.75%. Right. So I'll say cost to M should be, the cost to M should be MIBOR minus 0.75%, because had it taken a floating rate on its own, it would have cost it 0.75%. So it has to be reduced by 0.75%. Then cost of N, this is obviously I am talking of after swap. That should be a fixed rate of 13% minus 0.75%. So that's 13 minus 0.75, that should be 12.25%. So let's prepare the diagram for the swap. Here we say we have two parties, M and N, and there's a dealer in between. Now M will take, since M is having an advantage in fixed rate, a higher advantage in fixed rate. M is going to take a fixed rate loan, so he's going to pay outside 10%. M is going to pay outside 10%. N will be taking a floating rate, and that's going to pay MIBOR plus 1%. Then we say dealer from the point of view of M now. The cost to M should be MIBOR minus 0.75. So M will say to the dealer that my cost should be MIBOR minus 0.75%, and you refinance my entire 10%. Same way, even N is going to say that my cost is MIBOR plus 1%, you refinance it fully, and I'll pay you 12.25%. So if you consider what are they receiving and what are they paying, we'll get to know that we are achieving the target. So what does M pay? M pays 10%. It also pays MIBOR minus 0.75%. M receives also 10%. Essentially net effect is that my M is paying MIBOR minus 0.75%. MIBOR minus 0.75%. If you talk of N, N pays out MIBOR plus 1%. It also pays 12.25%, and it also receives MIBOR plus 1%. So essentially the cost to M, cost to N, cost to our N is 12.25%. Now talking of the dealer pays out MIBOR plus 1%. The dealer pays out MIBOR plus 1%. It also pays 10%. It receives MIBOR minus 0.75%, and it also receives 12.25%. If you take a net effect, you will find that this receipt gets cancelled out regarding MIBOR. 1% is paid, 0.75% is received, negative 0.75. So if you take a net effect of all of them, you'll find that there's a gain of 0.5% to the dealer. So that's how a typical swap can also be constructed like this, where only one party is having advantageous position along with the dealer. So that's how we complete this swap examples with the topic of interest rate swaps coming to an end. Thank you everyone. See you in the next video.